Well, welcome back. Let's have a closer look now at how the Nazis took power by using legal means. The Nazis insisted on using the legal structures of the Weimar Republic to take power. And this idea came to Hitler as he wrote his book, Mein Kampf. And he wrote Mein Kampf after the failed Munich Putsch. And here's a few primary source images of that putsch. In the top left, we see a photograph taken in 1923 in Munich with a number of leading Nazis. You might notice in there Ludendorff, General Ludendorff, standing next to Hitler, the left to Hitler's left, Hitler's right, on the left of Hitler as we look at it, the German general from the First World War who was famous for the stab in the back myth. We've got a number of other members of the army. We've got a number of other members of various Freikorps groups, including the SA, who are not really recognisable in their uniform. But look at those names. Frick goes on to be a leading Nazi down the track. These are well-known people. In the lower left-hand photograph, we can actually see members of the SA, a Nazi Freikorps unit, rounding up a socialist politician and putting him on trucks. It's interesting that these members of the Freikorps, the SA, actually look a lot like you would expect the army and the police to look like. But the armband gives it away. These aren't soldiers, these aren't the police, these are Freikorps wearing World War I uniforms. It's the SA, the Nazis' Sturmabteilung. Let's have a look at the top photograph above this first edition cover of Mein Kampf, and you can see the Freikorps moving through the streets of Munich as they tried to seize power. But ultimately, this attempt to seize power fails, and Hitler is imprisoned in Landsberg Castle, which you can see pictured here. Quite a picturesque castle. I was actually in Landsberg. I saw this most beautiful castle across this lovely frozen river and creek, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. It wasn't until later on that I realised that that was where Hitler was imprisoned. And you can see he's hardly doing it tough in the photograph in his prison cell. That's his prison cell, surrounded by friends. He was actually given a secretary, a typewriter, and he was able to write his ideas into his book, Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. And we'll return to this book title again. The Nazis had at their core a very violent ideology in which they felt leaders, people only rose to their best through struggle, through war, through violence. And so Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, is a really rambling source, very hard to read and make sense of. But it picks up on that theme of violence. But legality, our story in this video, is about how it was that the Nazis tried to come to power using legal means. After the failed Munich Putsch, Hitler gives up on the violent attempt to take power in Germany. So let's talk about that a little bit. As I've said, central to the Nazis' success in the Weimar era were decisions made by Hitler in prison in Landsberg, down in the southwestern part of Germany in the state of Bavaria, after his failed political putsch, his coup attempt. Now, the United States Holocaust Museum is the most beautiful museum in Washington, D.C. I thoroughly recommend you go there. And it's also got some fabulous resources online if you're wanting to study. And it puts forward this document. It says, in its secondary sources, Hitler drew important practical lessons from the failed putsch. First, Hitler figured out that the Nazi movement could not destroy the Weimar Republic by a direct assault by revolution without support from the army and the police. They often had the support of the army and police, but not enough. He also understood, this is Hitler here, he also understood that the Nazis could only be successful if they were seen as the one and only leader of the Völkisch people's movements, the German nationalist movements. Hitler needed the Nazis to be seen as the go-to right-wing nationalist Völkisch party in Germany. There were too many splinter groups. There were too many Freikorps groups. The Nazis, and he as the leader of the Nazis, had to be seen as the opinion leaders, the ones I guess, taking Germany in that right-wing way. And finally, the failed putsch taught Hitler that if he tried to attempt to overthrow the state by force, the military were likely to defend the legitimate, legal government of Germany. So from that moment on, he committed himself to taking advantage of the Weimar democracy to subvert the state from within. He wanted to create a dictatorship that was elected into power democratically. He wanted to win the popular vote. He wanted to use the freedom of speech given to Germans under the new Weimar Constitution to argue that they should lose their freedom of speech. He wanted the freedom of assembly, the freedom to gather together people of different political beliefs. He wanted to use that freedom to gather together people who were opposed to freedom of assembly. He wanted to take advantage of the Weimar Constitution, the rules of the Republic, to take power. Now, one of the things that Hitler does also after this, and I haven't highlighted in this video, but I've left it in to consider, he also takes the time to reorganize the Nazi Party at this stage. It becomes a highly organized political machine. It's got finance support from leading German business figures. He works with newspapers. He reorganizes the leadership structures. No more will the Nazi Party be a group of amateurs who try to take power in failed political putsches. It's a modern political party, much like the political parties in Australia and other democracies. And he's going to really demonstrate how far that party has come as a political movement in the Reichstag elections after the Great Depression of 1929 begins. So let's have a look at a couple of sources here. Take a moment now to read through them and, if necessary, hit pause. I suggest you hit pause right now, just for 30 seconds. Scan through them. Okay, I hope you noticed some similarities in the language of those two sources. When sources match, we often say they corroborate one another. They back each other up. If they're saying the same sorts of ideas and the same sorts of words, perhaps we're getting a sense that they are, I guess, meaningfully joining and validating each other. So, you're going to need to hit pause a little bit more now. I'd like you to play with these sources. So, have a look at these instructions now. Hit pause, read over these, and then I'll reveal what I've noticed as well. I'm going to hit pause for a moment also. So, okay, so when you look at these two sources, you'll see two different authors. You've got Kurt Ludeck and you've got William Shirer. William Shirer is claiming these are the words of Hitler. Kurt Ludeck is saying they're the words of Hitler as well. Now, I'd like you to think about how reliable each of these sources are. Kurt Ludeck was a friend of Hitler's, but he had to get out of the country in 1934. That's not a good sign of their friendship. Perhaps that means we can't trust him as much. I wonder where William Shirer is getting these words from. How reliable is Shirer? He's published this in 1959. It's one of the leading historical texts on Nazi Germany. It's like one of the great seminal texts of Nazi German history. But is it so similar that perhaps Shirer, an American writer, is actually taking the words of Ludeck? Is it possible it's the same source with some twists? Okay, I wonder which is the most accurate. I don't know if we'll ever quite know. Maybe there's some decisions there. If these are both coming from Ludeck, what if Ludeck made it up? Either way, broadly speaking, historians believe this is a statement where we can see Hitler starting to say the Nazis will take a more legal approach. So, let's have a look at where the sources corroborate each other. When I see sources like this, I like to highlight the bits that are similar. Look at the wording there. Hit pause if you need to, but look at the wording there and the similar language coming up. Likewise, the language here is very similar. Hit pause, think about what we're doing, and see this as an example of corroborating. Another similarity. So similar, in fact, I'm wondering if perhaps William Shire's source B is actually the same as source A with a few edits. I wonder if that means this is more reliable or less reliable. Our next video is going to look at the Nazis' use of violence.